Story 1. My mom had a boyfriend when we were young who was lovely and we thought was pretty cool. However, he drank during the day and we occasionally heard him cry at night, so my mom left him after a couple of years because she could not tolerate that with children around. When we were older, she told us his father came into the house when he was a child armed with a shotgun, killed his mother in front of him, and then took him out to the woods and killed himself. Story 2. I have an uncle I have only met once in my life. At any other family gathering, I was told he was working upstate. When I got older, my father told me the truth. This uncle was quietly abusive to his wife and children, but at some point, he broke his son's arm in a fit of rage. Other family members beat him severely, drove him out of town, and told him never to come back. His children are all adults with their own families now. I asked if they had any contact with their father, and they said they are not sure if he is even still alive. Story 3. My family did the 23andMe DNA test. It turns out my grandfather only fathered his first child, my mother. The other 4 children were fathered by another man. My grandmother had a long affair with another man. We think my grandfather somewhat knew but committed to raising them as his own. Thank goodness they had both passed away when this was discovered. The 23andMe test was the worst gift ever. Story 4. One of the favorite teachers at school, who was not creepy in the slightest and seemed like a good-hearted, stable man, was found to have thousands of videos of child abuse on his laptop. He was arrested, jailed, and ultimately took his own life. My great-uncle died in World War I, albeit from laryngitis. We believed him to be a hero as he had several bravery medals. Later, we found out his medals were posthumously retracted for war crimes, though the specific war crimes were never revealed. Story 5. My aunt's ex-husband was cheating on her with his own sister. They had been involved for years, according to the emails my aunt and mother found between them after accessing his personal computer in his office. There were photos of her all tied up and in bondage gear. Story 6. An old school friend became a police officer, then went to prison for placing hidden cameras in a neighbor's bathroom. He was released, then got caught taking inappropriate photos of a preteen girl. He also allegedly had animal abuse content on his phone. Story 7. A kind of nerdy, quiet guy I went to a very expensive private high school with immediately joined the Hells Angels when we graduated out of nowhere. He had the bright idea to sell meth for them but keep all of the money. They pulled out every single one of his teeth, and he had to get dentures at age 18. Story 8. My extended family has some difficult and troubling history. My dad's cousin killed his wife with an axe. My former uncle was arrested for meeting 15-year-olds for sex. He has 2 daughters with mental disabilities who were about the same age at the time. My grandmother's mother allowed her second husband and his friends to use my grandmother for sex from childhood through early teenage years to prevent him from cheating or abusing her. Story 9. Helped someone murder a husband and wife, then helped dispose of their bodies. He has done his time and is now a regular family man, living among us. Story 10. There was a new employee at my previous job who immediately made me uncomfortable. I always strive to be open and kind when meeting new people, so I wasn't sure why I felt that way. I tried to suppress my feelings, but perhaps he noticed because despite my efforts to be courteous, he was rude and unpleasant to me. Strangely, he was friendly and charming with my group of friends at work and began receiving invitations to their gatherings. Whenever I learned he would be attending an event, I would automatically skip it. About a year later, I found out through the news that he had been arrested and sent to federal prison for taking inappropriate pictures of young boys in the bathroom during our state fair. I was not surprised. Story 11. A guy in our group of friends was a child pornography offender. He had always been a bit quiet and socially awkward, so we never thought anything of the fact that he had never had a girlfriend. However, he was charged with the most serious level of the offense, which I understand means he had been actively involved in making the material. We had no idea at all until it hit the news, and another friend called to tell us. The person had been to our house, eaten our food, and sat on our sofa. Story 12. A man I was friends with confessed to me that he molested his ex-wife's younger brother. He asked me not to tell her so he would not lose custody of his daughters. I told her and never spoke to him again. My friend's husband was a dentist, and they were very wealthy. They had teenage children, including 2 daughters. He set up cameras in the pool house, including the bathroom, to watch his daughters and their friends change. When the police searched his work computer, they found thousands of videos of child sexual abuse material. Story 13. A woman I thought was my biological great-aunt all my life was actually adopted into my family after her father walked into the kitchen with a shotgun, killed her mother, and then himself in quick succession. Story 14. Our custodian, Phil, at an old job would get calls on his cell phone, and you could hear his wife and daughter berating him. He would always remain calm, then put his phone in his pocket and say, "Better hide the gas." One day, someone asked Phil what he meant by it. 20 years before that, Phil was married to another woman and had 2 sons. He and his wife had gotten into an argument, and he left to go to his bowling league. His wife tucked their sons into their beds and lay on the floor between their beds until they were asleep. Then she got up, grabbed a gas can, set their sons on fire, and lay back down between them. The boys died before the fire department arrived. She lived long enough to tell them what happened and blamed Phil. Phil even tried to confess to it, despite being at the bowling alley when it happened. I felt so awful for him, not just for his loss, but because he dealt with verbal abuse since he did not want anything to happen again and be his fault. Story 15. Trigger warning. Sexual assault. I was in rehabilitation for heroin addiction a while back. I was in detox with someone around my age at the time. We spent a lot of time together in detox, and he seemed like a pretty cool person. After a little while, he ended up talking about how he had court coming up and was in rehabilitation for drinking to look better in court. When I asked him what he did, he didn't want to talk about it right away. Eventually, he said he had sex with a girl, and since he didn't want to be with her, she was now accusing him of rape. Time went on. He left rehabilitation for court and never came back. When I got out, I looked up his story and found out exactly what he was accused of and that he was found guilty on all charges. Apparently, he was at a party and took a girl home with him. She was essentially unconscious at the party. He put her in his car and drove her out to a remote area. He raped her, beat her severely, sodomized her with a windshield ice scraper, and dumped her naked, unconscious body outside in a ditch in the snow. She survived, but barely. He is now essentially serving a life sentence. Story 16. When I was in high school, a girl became pregnant but hid her pregnancy. She ended up giving birth in her bathtub while home alone. She called her boyfriend, who had no idea, and they left the baby behind the fire department near a dumpster in the cold. Fortunately, the baby was found before anything bad happened, and they somehow regained custody. Story 17. A guy we were friends with was kicked out of school for inappropriate behavior on the table in the middle of class. He was 17 years old and attended an all-boys school. He moved away. I met him at a work conference in my 30s. He seemed to have turned out normal. Story 18. A friend of mine from the mothers group, whose first child was born a week apart from mine, and I spent years sharing experiences, swapping clothes, and watching the television show Friends together. We moved away when our children were 2 years old. In 2022, when our children were 15, she and a friend were arrested for making and selling videos of child sexual assault involving her children and others, using hidden cameras, including acts of bestiality. I had no idea before the truth came out, and I am still very shocked by it. This happened in a small town of 2,000 people. It was extremely repulsive. Story 19. A girl I went to school with got pregnant and married the father. The father was her cousin, her first blood cousin. Edit. I see a lot of comments. I just want to say that when my boyfriend and I started dating, she called us disgusting and called him a groomer because of the age gap. He is 1 year older than me. Story 20. My uncle and godfather, who is a registered nurse and has been one for decades, is more or less a sociopath. He regularly makes jokes about his patients who come in after a suicide attempt and, according to him, mocks them directly to their faces. He drives under the influence frequently and smokes cigarettes around his son's pregnant girlfriend because he does not think they should have a baby. Some medical professionals should never be allowed to hold positions of power over anyone. Story 21. A coworker told me that she accidentally killed someone 20 years ago by running them over. She was found innocent because the person ran into the road while drunk. Story 22. One of my schoolmates killed his mother in the most brutal way possible and then killed his little brother because he witnessed the entire event. The boy was 7 years old. Story 23. I connected with someone I genuinely liked, but he had children, and I was not ready for that. 6 months later, he was arrested for sexually assaulting his 8-year-old daughter and 13-year-old niece. This had been happening for over a year. Story 24. My friend's child's father had been cheating on her for months, if not a year, with her sister. She found videos of them together in a secret app and texts exchanging expressions of love. They are young. I believe the sister was 16 to 17 years old and my friend's boyfriend was over 20. She shared this information with the entire town and then got back together with him a couple of months later. It was embarrassing. Story 25. I have many coworker stories from the time I worked in a hospital and nurses who had some disturbing experiences. A coworker I used to talk to all the time and who was very funny was caught with child pornography. He was a nurse at the time, and the entire hospital floor was shocked. Many nurses then came forward, saying he used to ask them inappropriate questions. I had no clue. Another nurse I was close to and often helped was apparently frequently high on opioids by stealing them from patients. She worked specifically with patients prescribed these medications or helped other nurses take breaks. She would often blank out, and I would help her many times, thinking she was just old. Another nurse I saw as I entered the break room was going through other people's purses and bags. I was completely shocked that she would do such a thing. I never saw her the same way again. Story 26. One of my old friends from high school beat her toddler son to death. I really wasn't expecting that from her. Drugs were very much involved in this situation. Both she and her boyfriend were addicts. He was also allegedly in a gang, but I cannot confirm that. She is telling people who know her that her boyfriend beat the child to death. However, it doesn't matter who did it because they both left that poor baby for dead in a motel room. The manager unlocked the door and found the baby bruised and unresponsive. This is based on what I heard from a friend who was close to her. After she left the baby, she went to work, I think at Waffle House or somewhere similar. The hospital called her and said, paraphrasing, "Your baby was beaten badly. Please come identify him." She finished her 8-hour shift at work. Another strange thing is that when she wasn't arrested immediately, she took to Facebook just 1 or 2 days after the baby was beaten to say she had to make the decision to take him off life support. This timeline does not match what her brother said in the video. He claims the baby fought for his life for a week before he, the uncle, signed the documents to remove the baby from the machines. I don't know anything else about her sentencing. From what I heard about the condition of the baby, they should have faced much more serious charges. I believe they were charged with felony neglect. Someone murdered that child. There is no doubt about it. Not only did they murder him, but they wouldn't even visit him in the hospital while he was fighting for his tiny life. That is the part that stuck with me the most. Story 27. A kid I used to be friends with in elementary and middle school is a sex offender. I received a notification about him and another offender moving to my area. This was not a case of she was 17 and I was 19. It involved him and a preteen or a single-digit age child. Story 28. I stumbled across my coworker's Reddit account and identified him based on something he shared with us. He uses his actual first name and the initials of his last name as his username. Based on his comment history, he is obsessed with femboys and gay sex. But at work, he is the biggest macho, flirting with all the ladies. There is nothing disturbing about being attracted to gay or transgender people, but the fact that he completely hides this side of himself in day-to-day life shocked me nevertheless. Story 29. A very distant extended family member, not related by blood, was addicted to methamphetamine. He believed he had met the love of his life, another methamphetamine addict. They had a child together. Their lives were extremely chaotic, and due to their drug use, they had short tempers and struggled to care for the baby. For some reason, the child was never taken away from them, as they were always able to prove they were competent parents. One night, they had a huge fight but were able to reconcile. The baby was about 9 months old and had been crying nonstop. They struggled to put the child down. Our distant relative tried but failed. He asked the mother to go upstairs and put the baby down. He went to shower, got dressed, had something to eat, and when the partner returned, they used methamphetamine together again. A couple of days passed, and everything seemed okay. The drug use turned into another methamphetamine binge, totally normal for them. That is until they realized they had forgotten about the baby. They went to the crib and found the baby dead. Not just dead, the baby was beaten to death with half the bones in its body broken. My relative claims it was the partner, who was the last person to see the baby. He believed she was keeping him under the influence of methamphetamine so he would avoid seeing the dead child. He recalled that on more than one occasion, he went to check on the baby, and she stopped him, saying she had already tended to the child's needs while staying with him for about 99% of the 2-day binge. Allegedly. To this day, no one knows the truth, as they were all high and in a state of psychosis. Story 30. My coworker had an old cat he didn't want, so he drove it to a field in the middle of winter. The cat somehow made it back to his house and froze to death on his door. His best friend, another coworker, came home and saw the body. He let her blame his father for letting the cat out in the winter. This coworker then got a kitten because that's why he wanted to get rid of the old cat, and has let his best friend hate his father for having killed the senior cat for years. The situation is very troubling. Story 31. My good friend's husband took naked pictures of her while she was sleeping and shared them with a community of equally disturbing men. Story 32. The loss prevention employee at my former retail employer had a background in law enforcement. Later, I found out he was terminated because he was texting while driving, ran off the road, and caused a fatal accident involving a child. He went to prison for several years because of it. You would think such an event would humble a person, but he remained arrogant. Story 33. A family friend killed another child in the 1970s when he was 12 years old. He drowned the child because he was annoying. He was jailed until he was 18 and received mandatory counseling. He credits being caught and forced to face what he did by his therapist and his parents as what kept him from becoming worse. He fully believes he would have killed again if he had not been caught or if his parents had made excuses for him. Story 34. A man in my neighborhood is a credit card and financial schemes scammer. He is always trying to obtain other people's money illegally. Story 35. My paternal grandparents were cousins. When my grandfather died, my grandmother reminisced about how they had to ask the Pope for his blessing when they wanted to get married. They were Italian and from a very Christian family. I asked her why, and she casually mentioned that they met at a family reunion. Their parents decided that they were a great fit, so they started a relationship and later got married. Story 36. A person I was incredibly close to catfished his own stepdaughter into sexual role-playing and photos via a fake social media account. She was around 5th or 6th grade at the time. Her biological father was not in the picture, so he was essentially a father figure to her. The worst part was that she figured out it was him because he was blackout drunk, and her online crush suddenly stopped replying at the same moment he passed out. He lied to me about why he split from his girlfriend. He told me it was over for good because they fought. I had no idea and was defending him, saying it wasn't meant to be since they were always on and off. He would call me crying for days and we would talk for hours. I had no idea what he did until he finally confessed about a week later. The worst part is I still mourn that relationship. He was my best friend. He went to jail and turned himself in. He's tried to reach out to me, but I just don't have the stomach to speak to him ever again. Story 37. This will probably get buried. But anyway, I have a neighbor whom I see several times a day walking his dog. Sometimes when he passes by my house, I say hi to him and pet his dog. I never thought anything of it. The man seemed quiet but nice enough. However, I later found out that about 10 years ago he raped a woman at knife point. He was convicted and served time for it. Story 38. The father of a former male friend taught him how to put on a condom by demonstrating on himself. Story 39. I went to a private Catholic high school and graduated in 1987. When the priest abuse story broke in the early 2000s, I found out every single priest in the school had been convicted of sexual abuse crimes. Story 40. My manager had been sexually harassing me. I complained to human resources and they investigated. They discovered that he had been drugging his ex-wife and children and sexually assaulting them. This was found on his work laptop. He was part of a group of men involved in these crimes. The police came and arrested him at work, and the full case came to light. I am glad he tried to harm me because I was able to stop his depraved actions in their tracks. Story 41. Someone I was seeing was supposedly into bestiality. I had a random strong urge to look at his phone, which I normally wouldn't do. There were vivid descriptions of activities and discussions on the subject with his brother and uncle. He claimed it was a joke, but it was quite detailed. Among various violent things he had said about me and other women and minorities, this was by far the worst. Story 42. My eye doctor lost his license for performing breast exams improperly. I was involved. A man I knew had a daughter who was arrested because she put her newborn baby in the trash or at a dump. She claimed the baby was stillborn. The police were unable to prove otherwise. Story 43. One time my ex confessed to me that she had punched her little nephew in the back because he was crying too loud. I was horrified, but I tried to keep my cool to get more information out of her, so I asked how old he was. She claimed he was 5 and she was 12. To make matters worse, my ex and her nephew have a 10-year age difference. I did not think about this at the time, otherwise I would have called her out on it. The reality is that either he was 5 and she was 15 when this happened, or she was 12 and he was 2 when this happened. It is wrong no matter how you look at it. Story 44. My ex edited images of himself, our friends, and his aunt into inappropriate content. He used pictures taken directly from Facebook. Story 45. My cousin was caught torturing small animals. He also pulled a knife on another cousin. When this was brought to his parents' attention, my aunt said it was okay because God put animals on earth for humans to use as they see fit. My uncle got mad at the victimized cousin for antagonizing his son. Also, those same aunt and uncle, along with some other members of my family, are actual Nazis. Not in a racist way, but they belong to the John Birch Society and actually call themselves Nazis. One of my cousins works in the propaganda arm of the society. Story 46. Sister's ex turned out to be a child molester. She found out when the police raided their home in the early hours. Story 47. I found out a couple of weeks before the whole world did, but my childhood friend killed civilians for sport in Afghanistan and Iraq. He also convinced and coerced others in his unit to do the same. There was a large feature about him in Rolling Stone magazine, followed by a public broadcasting service documentary. Then, an A24 movie loosely based on his time in the country starring Alexander Skarsgård. His name is Calvin Gibbs. You can read about him yourself if you are interested in learning more. I will answer questions if anyone has them. Calvin was pretty antisocial where we grew up, but he was tall and handsome, so he got a pass for much of his behavior. Boys will be boys, until the boys become men and kill children because they are bored. Story 48. A guy I barely knew. Someone told me he did not want his little sister to go to clubs and party with her friends. So he gathered some of his friends and assaulted her outside a club. Yes, he assaulted her too. Another guy confessed to helping hide the body of a man his friend killed. Story 49. In high school, I met a guy on the football team who was kind of a loner and didn't have many friends. We started hanging out all the time, and he began coming over to my house frequently. He was an only child. His mother worked constantly, and I had many brothers and sisters, so my whole family kind of adopted him. He became like one of us. He used to come over for dinner often and called my mother Mom. He was there for holidays like Christmas, and we would have gifts for him under our tree. This continued for a couple of years. After Nate and I graduated from high school, I went to college, which took me away from home. Nate got a job at a local printing factory that made adult magazines. Nate still came by my family's house, but not as often. On July 4th, during my second year of college, I came home for the summer. Nate and I went to see fireworks together, but at some point in the evening, Nate disappeared. I had to call my sister to pick me up and take me home. She told me the police were at the house looking for Nate. They called me and informed me that Nate was the prime suspect in the disappearance of a 15-year-old girl. 3 days later, the police arrested Nate. After questioning, Nate confessed to murdering 7 women. Nathaniel White is serving a life sentence in prison. Story 50. A close relative of mine has 2 anal fistulas because his body developed a fistula. He has Crohn's disease. His 2 brothers have it as well, and both had sections of their intestines removed. Story 51. I was working with an older woman who was not the cleanest, her hair was greasy, and she was very cranky. We were aides in a special education room. This was about 15 to 17 years ago, and they still allowed people to bring baked goods in. She always made cakes for the kids' birthdays, which is important for later. I was going through a divorce, so over spring break I was going home to find a job and a place to live, but couldn't find anyone to watch my dog. She offered to help. She had 2 dogs herself. I told her I'd like to bring my dog to meet hers, but she didn't want me to. She said I should have a backup plan in case they didn't get along. I told her I had no backup. Then she said her house was messy. I told her sometimes everyone's house is messy, so she agreed. So my 15-year-old son, my dog, and I went to her house. She was a hoarder. Dog waste was all over the rugs, magazines stacked to the ceiling, and the kitchen looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. She wanted to show me the whole house. We had to walk sideways to get through the clutter. We got out of there as fast as we could. My son said he was screaming inside his head. When we got home, I showered, brushed my teeth, and gargled because the stench was in my throat. Obviously, my dog did not stay there. A neighbor offered to watch him. The next time there was a kid's birthday, she talked about making a cake. I offered to do it because I didn't want to report her. She clearly had issues, but I couldn't let her bring in baked goods. John, the teacher, said, "Charlene will make the cake, like she always has." So I went to the guidance counselor and asked what I should do. She said I had to tell John. It was my first year there, and Charlene had been with John for 5 years already. When I told him after school, he looked straight at me and said, "I don't believe you." I was shocked. He said Charlene would continue to make the cakes. When she gave me a slice, I thanked her, went into the hall, and threw it in the nearest trash can. Story 52. My old classmate was interested in animals, especially horses. He openly confessed to me at one point that he would have sex with a horse if he were ever given the opportunity. Story 53. A man I often saw and chatted with at my local coffee shop clearly had some intellectual disabilities and was very kind. I learned that he had spent 20 years in the state hospital's forensic unit after he shot and killed his mother. Staying that long is absolutely unheard of, which means it took that long to stabilize him and determine he was not safe to release. However, he is permanently categorized as unable to aid and assist in his own defense should such an incident ever happen again. Story 54. One day, my creative writing teacher in college stopped coming to class. He sent someone to substitute for him for a few weeks. When he returned, he seemed hollowed out. He explained that his wife had been murdered. She had been stabbed 25 times in her car in a Coco's parking lot. As a class, we were all sympathetic. The man was not the same for the rest of the semester, and we all gave him space. Years later, after the case went cold, we learned that he was being charged with the murder. Turned out he was always the prime suspect. He was seen speeding down the street to get home that day, then claimed he was home the whole time grading papers. His daughter explained that he never graded his students' papers himself. He was freshly showered by the time the police spoke with him, which was against his typical routine. Traces of her blood were found in his car. But everything was circumstantial, and they never had enough to actually prove it in court at the time. What happened was a colleague many years later came forward to investigators. He told them he had used the restroom and noticed the suspect's shoes and briefcase under the wall of the bathroom stall. From that stall, he heard him saying to himself, "You did it. They'll never know," or something to that effect. It was enough to reopen the case, and they were moving forward with a trial. Unfortunately, he died before it could start, as he was quite old by then. Story 55. My ex-husband was found to have thousands of videos of child pornography and created his own artificial intelligence-generated pornography involving children he worked with. Story 56. When I was a teenager, I ended up in foster care for a while. My dental needs had been neglected. None of my baby teeth had fallen out, and they were all rotting, causing issues for my adult teeth. It was painful. As a result, I hated the dentist. However, they found a dentist for me who was kind, compassionate, and very skilled. He was able to fix all my dental issues without causing me any pain. When I became an adult, I even took my children to see him. Later, he was found with illegal content related to child exploitation on his computers. He then took his own life. I am still very conflicted about this. Story 57. I heard an aunt arguing one time with her mother, and it seemed like she unintentionally blurted out words in anger that she was molested by her own father when she was a child up to her teenage years. Story 58. My ex told me that her brother molested her when she was 12, but she did not consider it molesting because she said she actually enjoyed it and they did it frequently. Story 59. I had a few casual conversations with my next-door neighbor. He told us about how he helped out around my house when an older woman used to live there. After a few months, another neighbor accidentally found the sex offender registry and learned he had been convicted of first-degree sexual assault. Story 60. At 21, my father raped a 15-year-old. It was 1992. She had a son shortly after the encounter. I was born in 1999. He overdosed when I was 18. I do not know if he was biologically my father's, but he admitted he slept with her. I wish every day I had different parents. Story 61. One former friend molested his niece a few times, was convicted, and is on the lifetime sex offender registry now. Later accusations suggested he also raped a stepsister. I believe that to be true. I haven't spoken to him since the original allegations came to light. Another former friend from when I was a kid, later in his early 30s, murdered 3 women and the daughter of one of them. Though a suspect with his first murder, it was only after he killed the other 3 about 5 to 6 years later that everything came together, and he was convicted of them all. He was a really nice kid, an Eagle Scout, bullied relentlessly through grade school. He has been sitting on death row now for the last 10 to 15 years. Story 62. My family is very close to our flight instructors because we are pilots, and that means we know people at a small airport in Italy. Our flight instructor is a really nice guy who usually invites us out to dinner on Sundays, and we go. He is a big World War II enthusiast. He collects everything: guns, helmets from all countries, even a motorcycle and some knives. He invited us to his house and showed us all his collection. After a while, he invited us to go upstairs to a secret room. When we got there, it was all Nazi-related items. My mother was a little shocked but intrigued, and I thought he must just really like collecting this stuff. I really should have put it together. 2 standout items in that room were a painting of him in a Schutzstaffel uniform and a golden swastika necklace engraved with Heil mein Führer. After that, I was not fully convinced, although I knew I should have been. What convinced me were his views on Russian and Chinese people. During a dinner, he said, Russian and Chinese people should all be killed, and the children should be killed first. And a good Russian is a dead Russian. He also said, the children should be first so they don't take revenge. He said all this when his granddaughter was just born. How could you view children like that with a newborn in your life? Oh, right, because he is a Nazi. We have not interacted with him since. Story 63. I found out that my mother was an unwed teenage mother, and her parents kicked her out of the house. She had to move in with her aunt. She only married my father because he agreed to raise her son, my oldest brother, as his own. They had 5 more children together, but they were never happy. I did not find this out until after my brother and both of my parents had died. Then my mother's younger sister told me, but apparently my oldest sister and my twin sister had known for years. I do not know if my brother ever knew that my father was not his biological father. Story 64. My grandfather molested my mom, which explains why she didn't protect me when it happened to me. On the other hand, you would think she would fiercely protect me. That is what I would do if my daughters were ever molested. Story 65. My grandmother was chatting with some of her daughters while a cousin and I were lounging nearby. I do not know what sparked it, but my grandmother started talking about some harsh experiences. My grandfather beat her until their son told him to stop. My grandmother took her anger out on my mother and regretted it. My cousin and I just stared at each other in shock. My grandfather was so kind and loving to me. Story 66. A man I graduated from high school with was arrested for planning to participate in a terrorist attack. He was involved with a white supremacist group. He was recorded on a phone call discussing how he knew how to make bombs and had access to firearms. To be honest, it was not very surprising. Story 67. A sort of friend, basically in my friend group, but we never had a one-on-one conversation. He was caught in the act with a toddler and got 10 years in prison, served 6. A miscarriage of justice, if you ask me. I hoped that would forever be the worst thing someone I knew had done. Until recently, it was a regular at the store where I worked, someone I'd stop and chat with on the street if I saw him, a troubled but seemingly decent guy. He recently got married to the mother of his child. He shot her in the face in front of their kids. Miraculously, she survived. He had recently become very radicalized and super into Jesus. But I wouldn't have even thought he owned a gun, let alone would shoot his wife. He is yet to stand trial, but suffice to say, he will probably be going away for a long time. Story 68. An older man at my first job was very kind and quiet, but quite melancholic the entire time I knew him. It turned out that decades earlier, his 5-year-old child had somehow gotten out of the house and drowned in a pond on their property. His wife found the body and shot herself in the head but lived for several days before dying. He discovered them when he got home from work late that day. Absolutely brutal. Story 69. My dad used to work with an older man that I met a few times at some holiday gatherings. He had a good sense of humor and was polite and respectful. Let's call him Jim. In the early 2000s, Jim's ex-wife was bringing their children around her new boyfriend. Her boyfriend was a registered sex offender, which she knew and did not see as an issue. When Jim found out, he told her that her new boyfriend was not allowed to be around their children. She agreed but continued doing it anyway. The second time Jim approached her about it, he warned that if she did it again, he would kill her. She did not listen and had the children stay the night with her and her boyfriend. The next day, Jim took his hunting rifle and truck, parked about 150 yards from her workplace, and waited for her. When she appeared, he shot her in the head. Immediately after, he called the police, turned himself in, and served about 15 years in prison. Wild. Story 70. Used to be friends with 2 Royal Scottish Highlanders, and after they drank too much one night, they started revealing secrets. Murder of civilians, assassinations of enemy soldiers, and sexual abuse of civilians. Never hung out with them again. Story 71. This guy, let's call him Joe, had been a very good friend of mine when we were younger, but we lost touch after college. One day, I saw Joe's picture on the local news. It turned out he and his male roommate had an ongoing relationship that went sour. The roommate then got a girlfriend, and Joe became insanely jealous. He shot and murdered both of them and then killed himself. Joe was one of the nicest, quietest guys in my circle of friends, and I would have never suspected he was capable of that. Story 72. Someone I do not talk to anymore because of what he told me and because he has kidnapping charges said that when he was 13, he used video games to lure his cousin for sexual favors. He ended up in a facility because the family pressed charges, but he had the record sealed. His mother's side of the family will not talk to him because he also got drunk and hit on his brother at a wedding. Story 73. Step-grandpa was a pedophile. He molested twin girls, mom and aunt, and had more children with grandma. When those children had kids, mom and aunt warned them about the pedophile to protect the children. They ignored the warnings and pretended he was a good man, still praising him to this day. Some families are deeply dysfunctional. Story 74. I received a text from a couple of former coworkers one day saying, "Hey, did you hear about the guy we all used to work with? Crazy, right?" I hadn't talked to these guys in a while and assumed it was something like he won the lottery. I didn't follow up or think much about it at the time. The guy was always a little crazy, but in a good way, if that makes sense. Quirky might be a better way to put it. No, he didn't win the lottery. He murdered his ex-wife's new husband in front of their children. He is currently serving multiple life sentences. Story 75. A close and successful friend of mine, who comes from a well-to-do family, has worked in adult entertainment and as a topless barmaid. To this day, she still wears masks, goes to clubs, engages in intimate encounters for money, and then returns to a very distinguished career. No one would ever know. Story 76. A guy I worked with and I basically ran this pizza shop. We worked together sometimes 7 days a week. We had so much fun every day. Laughing, telling jokes, beers after work. He had even been to my house to hang out. We had life moments together, you know? The pizza shop eventually closed, and we went our separate ways, checking in every once in a while. We ran into each other a couple of times over the years at the bar. At the time, I was working for a horticulturist, basically gardening for wealthy people, an awesome job, by the way. One morning, I got my coffee on the way to work and pulled into my boss's driveway early. I was sitting in my car scrolling through the local news, trying to get some coffee down before 8. There were articles and video of the man being arrested, headline news. Multiple counts of child abuse as young as 1-year-old on his computer. Even typing this, I'm absolutely sick. I left work early that day, but this isn't about me. Thankfully, I knew him before I had a family, but I swear to you, there were no clues. I met his parents. I would have never guessed it. It's just vile, and I'm even disgusted with myself for not knowing. I looked him up through Megan's Law, and I know where he lives and works. I've gone back and forth so many times about calling his workplace a bar and restaurant and just telling them, I'm all for forgiveness, but there are some things that just cannot be forgiven. Story 77. I had a friend group for almost 10 years. One of our friends hid the fact that he was a registered sex offender from all of us. The most concerning part was that I was 15 and the group members were 18, 20, 17, and so on. When we found out, it destroyed the group. It was very upsetting. Story 78. My father-in-law gives his wife Adderall to help her talk more. When they have a fight, she becomes quiet, and he adds Adderall to her drink to get her to open up. It works, but it is troubling because she already has insomnia and many other health issues. Story 79. My physical education teacher's grandfather was involved with the Czechoslovak resistance against the Nazis and was one of the many people executed in retaliation for Operation Anthropoid, which was the killing of Heydrich. He was executed at the Kobylisy shooting range. My grandfather's uncle attacked his mother with an axe when he was 13. She survived the attack. He was taken away, and nobody has heard of him since. We do not know when, where, or how he died. Story 80. I asked my former partner what his darkest fantasy was. Out of curiosity and boredom, he told me he fantasizes about assaulting me in front of my former partner and family. He also wanted to harm my brother out of jealousy. Additionally, he did something very disturbing to my dog, but I never received a confession or solid proof. The list goes on. I could legitimately write a book. Story 81. One of my favorite professors in college was a wonderful, smart, and kind man. My best friend and roommate, and I loved him. We took his classes together throughout college. He was married and had 2 daughters, one biological, about 18 years old, and one adopted, about 12. When he shared cute anecdotes about his family, he always focused on the younger daughter and never mentioned the older one. About 1 or 2 years after graduation, my old roommate called to catch up. He asked if I had heard about what happened to Dr. P. I said I had not, as I had moved away. He then told me that Dr. P's wife returned home unexpectedly and found him in their younger daughter's bedroom, committing a terrible crime against her. She immediately called the police, divorced him quickly, and he was fired from the university. There are no news stories or online information about this incident. It was not a rumor. Everyone, students, alumni, and faculty, knew what he had done. People often say he was the last person anyone would suspect of such a horrible act. Story 82. I don't have confirmation, but I remember my mother used to leave for a few hours at night to give a massage to the father at our Catholic church because his back was hurting. I always thought it was strange, and looking back, I am certain they were having sex. Story 83. An acquaintance's brother was convicted as a child sex offender when he molested his daughter because he wanted her to get in touch with her feelings. His aunt was also molested by her father, and she never said anything negative about the nephew's actions. Story 84. I worked in a bar in Africa for a while, and my partner made multiple inquiries while drunk about the price for hunting people. I left after a few months, but I am pretty sure he would have found what he was after. Story 85. A teacher I used to work with confessed that he was attracted to children under the age of 10. He claimed he never tried anything, but he was aroused while talking about it. I have never been so disgusted in my life. Story 86. My first girlfriend from high school became an adult film actress. Edit. She was not famous. I do not remember her stage name. I have not seen her since high school in the 1990s. It has been over 10 years since I found out. We were friends on social media for years before I closed that account, and I never mentioned it to her. Story 87. Recorded this older man's album. The girlfriend of the drummer I hired was from the same town. Turned out she knew the man and his family. 40 years earlier, he had experienced a schizophrenic episode and murdered his mother. He was arrested, tried, and found not guilty by reason of insanity, and spent time in a mental institution. The man did seem a little odd, but I never expected anything like that. Story 88. I found out that one of my friends, not a close friend but a distant friend, actually ended up getting arrested for pushing a girl off a hill and breaking her legs from the fall. No joke. Story 89. My contact was not answering, so I thought he had been arrested. After checking, I was correct, but he was not arrested for drugs. He was arrested for molesting 2 children. Story 90. My stepfather's sister is high-functioning and has a daughter. The child lived with us for about 6 months as a foster child after it was discovered that her mother's boyfriend and her own grandfather had raped her multiple times before she was 5 years old. Story 91. I dated my ex-boyfriend from 2010 to 2015. The relationship ended because I learned that he was arrested for distribution and possession of child pornography. I was with him for almost 5 years, and he hid this from me. It affected me deeply, and it took me 2 years to trust people again. The last I heard, he is still in prison for a 3rd offense. Story 92. Found out my former best friend's husband sexually assaulted his 2-year-old niece when he was 18. They were in their late 20s when he told her about it. She saw no reason to leave him because it was in the past, nor any reason to stop trying to have a baby with him. I cut contact with both of them. Gross. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.